The key feature of the current medical model of birth is that it is a medical model. So everything that goes into medicine as we know it today also goes into birth as we know it today. That includes the depersonalization of the patient, the very idea of a patient, somebody who is patiently awaiting medical procedures to be performed on her, someone who is an inert machine that can break down and then can be fixed by the mechanics. And I know that I'm exaggerating, making a bigger case than is really. I would like to say that there's been a lot of progress. There's also been a lot of regress. The dominant model of birth is getting worse and worse, even as a new consciousness is kind of under the surface. So I think that we have a moment of potentially birth for the whole system into a new paradigm. But right now, the birth system is still very much in an old medical industrial model. So our system of birth that we're familiar with is inseparable from all the rest of modern life. We can locate enormous problems and the cause of so much of our psychology, so much of our trauma in birth, but we cannot change birth without changing everything else. So a lot of modern birthing practices, if you held everything else constant, you really can't change them that much. Modern birthing practices are in part a response to the disempowerment of women, to our alienation from our own bodies. They are part of a general idea that progress, human progress, means exerting more and more control over the world, over nature, winning a war against nature, winning a war against the other. So these paradigms and psychologies and states of being, if we hold them constant, we really have no choice but the kind of birth system we have today. That's why the revolution in childbirth that is underway in midwifery and in returning to traditional birthing practices, it's part of a much bigger change. A return to, I won't say a return to nature, but I would say a reclaiming of our inherent connection to nature and our trust in nature and inner nature and in the organic intelligence of the body. When we recover trust in the organic intelligence of the body, then the motivation, the intellectual motivation for birth interventions vanishes, and the physical conditions that require those interventions also soften. Because when a woman is going into birth confident, going into birth unafraid, going into birth with trust in her body, and when she has seen that throughout her lifetime, when she has absorbed that from the culture, when she knows that her mother and her sister and her auntie also have that confidence, then she won't be afraid. Because fear, anxiety in nature, if an animal is afraid or anxious, then she'll halt the birth process and find a safer nest and then resume it. So this alone, this climate of belief already has a profound effect on birth. So, I'm just illustrating one way in which the general consciousness ties into the experience of the birthing mother, and then these interventions aren't necessary. It's not like the obstetricians and doctors and scientists who invented these interventions were just stupid or evil. They were responding to conditions that have grown over centuries and responding to the disempowerment of women. Once you've disempowered women and frightened them and acculturated them to an idea that pain can be avoided and that it's bad and that childbirth is a medical condition, once you've acculturated people to that, then the interventions are welcome. So changing birth, it's not just a matter of new techniques, replacing bad techniques with good techniques. That's part of it. But it's also a shift in our consciousness around birthing. Modern birthing practices are embedded in a view of human progress and human destiny, which for centuries you might call it the patriarchy, has been a progressive conquest of nature to imprint intelligence onto a world that has none. So in that paradigm, we can improve upon birth, because the body doesn't really know what it's doing. It evolved haphazardly and it works okay, but we can improve on it. And the more exact, the more precise our control over the birth process, the better we are able to eliminate all variables and eliminate all risk. In this moment, I'm remembering the 4 best moments of my life, which were the birth of my 4 children. Each one of them stands out as a unique and sacred, that it's like separate from all the rest of my life. It's its own bardo, it's its own phase of existence. It had a before and an after, but that moment kind of stands in separation from the before and after. I was like transported to another realm. I'm just in such profound gratitude for this incursion of miracle into my life, when an entire new human being comes into existence. It's sad that for many people that moment can get lost in all of the routines and procedures and hurry of the birth process. My daughter-in-law is a midwife and went through a midwife training program, was quite disillusioned by the whole thing. Yeah, I mean, there were practices that she disagreed with. The way that they treated women, she thought was appalling. There were many things about it, the medicalization of the whole procedure. But the thing that really got to her was the hurry, the attitude of crisis. And that comes from, on the one hand, just the medicalization of the whole thing, but also the lack of trust that there's an organic process underway. And the mentality of minimizing risk, the idea that the worst possible thing that could happen and the thing that we should do everything possible to prevent is the death of the baby or the mother. Now, I fully agree that that is a terrible tragedy. I'm not saying that we should be cavalier about it. But consider this. Suppose that we could eliminate all neonatal death if we made cesarean section routine. And in many places it already is routine. But what if we made it universal? Or what if we grew babies in artificial wombs and had no extraneous variables and no risks? And suppose if we did that, we could reduce the infant mortality rate to near zero. Should we do that? And maybe a more important question is, how do we make that decision? So much of medicine and beyond has been reduced in our society to a matter of calculation, risks versus benefits. To make that calculation, you have to quantify things. In childbirth, what's the most easy thing to quantify? It is, live births versus deaths. It's a lot harder to quantify the intimacy of that moment. It's a lot harder to quantify the subjective experience of the baby. It's a lot harder to quantify the imprint that is made on a newborn baby when it has completed a mighty struggle and made it into another world. How do you quantify that? And when we take that away from babies and from mothers, here again is a tremendous accomplishment, a tremendous triumph that often pushes her to the edge of her capacities. And she comes through that. How does that contribute to her soul? Can we measure that? So when we have a system that makes decisions based on what we can quantify, we leave all of those things out. And we are still born and we still give birth, but there's something missing. There's something that hasn't happened. And that intuition might follow us for the rest of our lives. Something was supposed to happen and it didn't happen. Where then is this confidence that I might have gotten through my birth struggle that I now no longer have, or that I never gained? This confidence that I can do it. If I've never gone through that triumph, then maybe I'm a lot more susceptible to authoritarianism that does it for me. I might stay in a state of dependency because I don't know that I can do it. So this is the kind of thing that gets left out. We can make good arguments for natural childbirth, even based on the measurables, because the promise of technology to eliminate risk is always chasing a mirage. Each intervention seems to make an incremental improvement, yet in sum total, childbirth is in a highly technological context isn't that much better, if any better, and maybe even worse than childbirth, say, in the Netherlands, where home birth is common and technological interventions are much rarer. Like, we don't even get the safety and health that we are achieving. So you can make a case for natural childbirth based purely on the measurables. We can play in the territory of the system and still make a case. But by doing that, we're kind of giving away the game. We're granting the idea that, okay, if we could eliminate risk, then we should do all these technological innovations. But I don't agree. I think that there's something to be gained by facing risk, by facing hardship and overcoming it. Now, I'm not going to compel a woman to take a risk that she does not want to take. That's not my role. And part of the trust in women and their bodies is that they will know what is right for them. But we also have to look at the context of this choice. And when the context is an entire industrialized, medicalized system of birth and a lifetime or generations of alienation from their own bodies and generations of physical degeneration from diet and from toxins in the environment and so forth, then the choice is conditioned on all of these things. So if we want really to empower women and to move toward natural childbirth, we also have to change that totality of conditions from which women are choosing today. In our culture, we have a divide between science and spirituality. Science is about everything that we can measure, everything that we can quantify. And spirituality is about those things that we cannot. I'm imagining now a woman, an expecting mother, and maybe it's 36 weeks, 38 weeks, and the doctors are telling her, oh, you're past due. And she says, no, I'm not. It's happening in perfect timing. Well, who do we believe here? How does she know? The doctors might say, you ignorant woman, look, here's our charts. It says that you conceived on this date and the baby is supposed to come on this date. So they're trying to impose a schedule, or you could even say impose an order or an intelligence onto something that they don't fully understand. If they fully understood it, then they would see the intelligence in the organic process of birth. In order to see that, though, you have to be in an ideology that grants that as a possibility. And the ideology that we have been immersed in as a culture for a long time sees intelligence only in the human mind. It doesn't see intelligence in the world, which is very different from pretty much every indigenous culture. Indigenous cultures did not think humans were the only beings here. They lived in a world full of being, bursting with being. Everything was alive. Everything was conscious. Everything had beingness. Not only the body, not only other plants and animals, not only our own bodies, not only other animals, not only plants, but even the wind, even the river, the mountain, the sun. They were in a world of beingness. And the totality of the world also had intelligence. Things happened for a purpose. The reigning paradigm of reductionism, and it's kind of a hobby horse. Everybody's criticizing reductionism, yet it's still with us. That says that what's real is the underlying causes of things. Like, why does the arrow fly and hit the target? Well, it's because of the initial force and the wind and gravity, and it makes this curve, and that's why it does it. Say you're a pregnant mother and you're having morning sickness and you vomit. Why? Well, we can take apart the body and find the particular hormones and how they're interacting with some other receptors and et cetera, and that's the reason. Other cultures, it's not that they ignore that level of cause, but they understand other levels of cause and maybe even put them in a higher place. So, for example, another culture might say, oh, the nausea, the vomiting is that she's expelling evil spirits early in the pregnancy that might otherwise harm the baby. Like, that might be another kind of answer, a so that, rather than a because. These other levels of explanation make a lot of sense when you understand the world as alive. when you understand the world as intelligent and conscious, and when you know that we're not the only beings, human beings are not the only beings, that encourages an attitude of humility, where we then listen for the intelligence in, say, a woman's body, in a fetus, in the womb. Now, there may still be a reason for intervention. Even when you fully understand that intelligence and you're in deep communication with the mother and the baby, maybe there's still something to be done. Maybe, probably, it's a lot less heavy-handed. It might be like some midwives and acupuncturists have ways to turn a breech baby, very gentle. Sometimes even one acupuncture point can do that. So it's not that we do nothing. When we understand the intelligence of nature and the intelligence of the body, that doesn't mean we just sit back and do nothing. But from that understanding, we are much more precise and much more humble, rather than assuming that it doesn't know what it's doing and imposing our will upon it. So it's kind of a subtle difference. I'm not saying that any of the intelligence and the technology and these interventions that come from it are useless. They have their place. But when we don't understand, when we don't accept other intelligences, then we usurp their place with our own. So it's really about coming into relationship again. It's no longer dominating, and no longer or not absenting ourselves either, but really coming into intimacy with the other.